Ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so today we are going to transition. We were actually supposed to do this one last time. I think I actually switched them up. But today we are going to transition into learning a little bit about families, okay? As of now, we really only know families as maybe loading in the occasional component into our residential project. But other than that, we don't really know anything about creating them, okay, and the different the different tools in the family creator. So it's a little bit different in the sense that it actually gives you, when you go and create a new family, it gives you actually a different layout and you have a different tool set to work with as well. So we're going to look at that. We're also going to look at how, I think there were some questions from last week about how to change and modify families as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But the overall goal of today's exercise is to build a very simple family using the family creator in Revit. And with that, what you're going to create is going to be this chair right here. So I give you the chair, I give you all of the or a majority of the basic dimensions that you need to create it, and it'll be up to you to get it to look as close as this as possible. Okay, so but before we do that, let's talk about families, and then we'll let you guys work on that till about lunchtime. All right, so right now you guys only know families as what we've brought into a residential project. So let's just bring in a random something. I'm going to go to place component and we'll bring in a family. Let's just use this desk here, for example. So I'm going to place this desk down, and there's a couple ways to start to edit the different properties of this desk. Okay, so if we click on the desk, if we click on the desk, we're going to have a couple different type of parameters, and you're going to hear me use this word parameters a lot over the next couple days. So today's family that we're going to create is going to be a little bit different than the family that we're going to end up creating next class. Today is going to be a non-parametric family. Next class, we're going to learn to build parametric families, meaning that you are able to make certain adjustments to that object inside the Revit model versus opening up the family, editing the family, and then reloading it back into the project. Usually a most efficient family and a really good and well-built family, you can make all of those changes inside the Revit model. But I will forewarn you that this is probably the most difficult aspect, in my opinion, of Revit. So we'll go over a very basic parametric family. I'll show you how to create like a small table that you can adjust the diameter or the height of it, or adjust the width of the legs and the material. So we'll do something kind of basic like that. But there are people that build families for a living. Someone who might build like an LG refrigerator that you can fully adjust, all of the different sizes and whatnot. And that's where it gets extremely complex. I'll show you the basics on how to start to get there, and you can keep practicing as you move forward. But let's just look at kind of one of the tables and one of the objects that's already preloaded inside Revit. You'll notice that a majority of the objects that are preloaded into Revit are fairly basic. They're not super complex. So we have this desk, for example. This desk, as when you click on it, is not editable inside of our Revit project. So right now we are not in the family editor, but when you click on this table, let's look at some of the different editing features that we have built into it. So it says right here, furniture. So it's been assigned as a part of the furniture family. Okay, when we actually start creating a family today, you'll notice that you have the choice of picking what kind of a family it is. In this instance, this is a piece of furniture. So the reason why they picked that is that this now will eventually be a part of some type of a catalog or some type of a schedule, a furniture schedule of some sort. So which is why it's important to actually define a lot of these different pieces. And you can see here under identity data, it says image, comments, and mark. Mark would be you assigning it some form of a keynote. So if you were to mark it in a set of construction documents, it comes up with some type of a marking that identifies what it is. So, and then also we have constraints. So I'm guessing that whoever created this, they created probably a floor-based family. That's another thing that we'll talk about today, is what type of family you create. You have things like floor-based families, wall-based families, so that when you create them, they automatically join up to a wall or some type of a surface. You have things called face-based families. I think I already mentioned floor-based families. So you can actually ceiling-based families if you're creating like a light fixture or something like that. So there's a whole slew of them. And when we open up that menu, you'll see the different object or the different options that you have to pick from. And they're usually all associated with what their function is. So if it's a light, you want it to be a ceiling-based family because you want it to actually adhere to the ceiling versus, a floor, which is what, a table or a desk would adhere to. So these are all going to be examples of type-based parameters. Okay, we have type and instance-based parameters. Type-based parameters are going to be the parameters that you can adjust right here in your properties dialog box. Whereas, reverse that. Instance-based parameters are going to be the different parameters that you can choose based off of just this object right here. So if I clicked on it right here, I can make specific changes based off of this one particular instance. Okay, so, and these will vary from family to family. Right now, there's actually not very many instance-based parameters that can actually adjust. Let's load in another one where we can actually see more. Let's see, load. Let's open up maybe furniture, tables, round. Let's try this one. Okay, this one doesn't have any either. Let's try another one. Eventually I'll stumble upon one that will actually have some good instance-based parameters to use as an example.
Go to plumbing, bathroom.
Plumbing, let's try plumbing. Okay, so we have bathtubs. Let's try this one. This is not going to work because this is a wall-based family. Sorry, it's a little trial and error. If we don't get it on this shot, then we will. Let's try another piece of furniture. Let's try bed. Okay, well, we'll find one here eventually that has instance-based parameters, but the next type of parameter is going to be a type-based parameter. A type-based parameter is when you actually click on the actual object. So if I click on this desk and I click on Edit Type, these are going to be type-based parameters. Okay, so if I change these right here, these are all associated with the specific type that you've created. So this desk type is a 60-inch by 30-inch type. Okay, so and you can create a different type by just clicking on Duplicate and creating a new type. Okay, so if I change any of these options, that will change all of the pieces of that type of furniture. Okay, whereas instance-based parameters are, if I have, for example, 5 desks, I could go and click on one and I could change some of the individual instances right here, which we'll actually probably see a little bit more next class when we actually create our own. You can go through and you can change some of the different features without changing all of the other ones as well. Okay, that'll make a little bit more sense once we actually stumble upon a family that has instance-based parameters. But our type-based parameters are going to be all of the different parameters that are associated with the specific type of furniture that you are creating. So if I change the depth, the height, the leg height, or the width of this one particular type, it will change all of them. If I want to create something like, let's say, a 70-inch by 30-inch desk, I would then need to duplicate it, call it 70-inch by 30-inch, and I can now make any changes I want in terms of the materials, the finishes, or the dimensions per this specific type. Okay, so I would then change this to 70 inches, and that would be that type. Okay, and notice that it makes it a little bit better, or a little bit bigger. So that's an example of a parametric family. Okay, I can go through and simply just type in certain changes and it'll automatically adjust that family accordingly. The family that we're going to create today will be non-parametric in that we will build the piece of furniture, but it'll have no adjustment qualities to it. Okay, if you want to make changes to it, you'll have to go into the actual family and make the edit. Okay, does that make sense? So, and then to do that, you can do it a couple different ways. You can either click on the piece of furniture and click on Edit Family, or you can just double click on the piece of furniture and it will open it up in the family editor. Okay, everybody see that? And then now here, if I click on all of these different pieces, you'll notice that basically the piece of furniture is assembled using just very basic components. So the way that I always tell people to think about families when you're creating them is to break down whatever you're building into its most basic shapes. Okay, so for example, if you're going to build this computer monitor, I'm going to build a family of the computer monitor to put inside of an office. Well, what is that computer monitor? If you break it down into its basic shapes, what are those shapes of the computer monitor? Yeah, it's mostly comprised of a bunch of different extruded rectangles. That's really all it is. You know, there's a couple other little shapes. There's actually a circle in here. You know, you have kind of another extruded rectangle here in the back and a couple of other extruded shapes, okay? But essentially, we're just breaking it down into all of the actual, very basic shapes of that object, okay? So if you look at this desk here, we have a tabletop, which is just an extruded rectangle, okay? We have different drawers, okay, or the drawer faces, which are all just extruded rectangles. And you can start to see as you look through that you have all of these different shapes. Then you even have a door handle. Well, what's this door handle or this drawer handle comprised of? More extruded rectangles. Yeah. That's all it is. So if you look at all the different objects in this classroom, you can tell that they're all just, they're all made of just essentially very basic shapes and components. Okay, and then you will run into times when you have something slightly more difficult, like for example, maybe this table leg, where this is actually not really just an extrusion of a basic shape, because you can see here that what's on the bottom is actually different than what's on the top. Okay, so those are going to be your more difficult components, but we're going to look at how to create all of these different things today. Okay, so does everyone understand kind of the fundamentals of how to build these different types of furniture or whatever type of family that you're creating? Now, another thing you'll notice when you are creating families is that the creation tab, this right here, this is going to be your main tool set when you're creating families. You'll notice that it's very simple or similar to creating generic models. Okay, when we were creating the generic model of the fireplace, you'll notice that all of your tool sets here are exactly the same. Okay, so why would you create a generic model versus creating a family? Anybody have a guess? Why would you create a generic model inside of your project versus opening up a family creator and actually creating the actual family? Whether it be a chair or a generic model, they're going to be exactly the same. You can create the exact same thing in both areas, but why would you maybe want to do one in one place over the other? Any guesses?
You only need one.
Yeah, actually, that's almost exact. So if you only need one, let's say you're going to create a generic model of something very, very, very specific. You're never going to use it for anything else other than the project that you're working on. Maybe because you're building it specifically for that project. Like, you have like an opening in a wall that you're likely to never create ever again. It's very specific. Well, then you would create a generic model of just that object. Well, if it's something that you think that you might, you create a chair. Oh, I really like this chair. It's really nice. It's contemporary. I'll likely put it in another one of my models in the future. That's when you'd want to create a family of it so that you could archive it, save it on your hard drive, and it's there for your use in the future. Something that I've started creating probably 5 or 6 years ago was I actually have my own little, on my hard drive at my work and on my computer in my actually not on my flash drive. I actually have a big giant archive of all of the different families that I've used in the past. So as you download things, and starting from today, if you go online and you find things and you bring them onto your computer, start to save these and start to create a catalog of all the different families that you have. So I have, just like when you go into, let me open it up real quick. Just like when you go over to load a component, so place a component, edit type, load, I have a folder structure just like you see right here, but of all of the different things that I've downloaded over the years, and I can always go back and find those things. And now that I've done that hundreds, if not thousands of times, I rarely have to go do that anymore because I have them. They're already there, unless I need a completely new light fixture or a light sconce from a lighting manufacturer, then I'll just go get that. Okay, so let's actually look at how we could start to create some of these different pieces. Okay, so I am going to, and I'm going to use this table for an example. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, right before you came in, and a couple of people that showed up a little bit late, today for Critical Thinking Exercise 9, we're going to be building a chair. Okay, and I've given you a chair that you guys can create. If you finish it really early, create an ottoman as well. Some people will finish this in 10 minutes. Some people, it'll take you the typical amount of time. So, and you are by no means, you are not limited to this exact piece of furniture. If you'd rather do something else, I'm totally fine with that. You can go on Google, type in furniture, and find something that maybe looks a little challenging for you. That's totally okay. The nice thing about this piece of furniture is that it gives you some dimensions, and it kind of gets you started relatively easy. But if you look at this piece of furniture, you can tell that it's really just broken down into a handful of just very basic shapes and extrusions. That's really all it is. Okay, so let's look at how we might start to create this. And I'm going to start by doing just a breakdown of all the tools, and then I'll actually go through and create the chair for you guys. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the Revit icon, and I'm going to go over to New. Okay, and you have the option here to create a new project, which we've been doing a lot lately. Okay, and you can also create a new family. All right, so we're going to click on Family this time, and notice that when you open on New Family, it gives you a whole big old variety of templates that you can choose from to start that family. And what you have to think about before you choose the family is, what is the purpose of this family? Is it going to be a piece of furniture? Is it going to be a light fixture? Is it going to just be some random object? So what have you. So today we're going to be creating a piece of furniture. So you'd likely create a piece of furniture. Okay, if you do that, you'll have that furniture tag. It will be labeled as furniture when you actually load it into your program. Okay. A lot of the times though, I will also pick generic model. Okay. You can see here that under generic model, you have the option to pick what kind of face you want your model to be adapted to. When you pick furniture, it's likely going to be a floor-based furniture. So by default, it is floor-based because most furniture you don't put on the ceiling. So it just kind of works like that. But if you want to get into the specifics of what face you want that to be associated with, you can pick that using the generic model option. So let's just say I'm going to end up coming back to, actually, you know what? I'm not going to pick furniture just for this example, but let's look at maybe a couple of these different ones. So I'm going to click on floor-based, okay, and let's see what we get when we open up floor-based. So when we open up a floor-based family creator, what you are looking at right now is actually a little pad of a piece of floor. So they give you like a piece of floor to work off of, and then you would create your object on that floor, and then when you bring it into your model, it would associate itself with a floor just as it does inside the family. Okay, and then notice that what we're viewing right now is actually a floor plan of that family. Okay, but if I go over to New and go to Family and maybe pick generic model wall-based family, and I hit OK, notice that it gives you an actual wall that you can work off of. Okay, so you are going to build your object off of that wall, and when you load it into your project, it will associate itself with walls just as it does in the example wall that it gives you in the family. Okay, and it even tells you what the placement side is. I would want to build, let's say, a light sconce. I would build it on this side, and when I load it into my project, it would then grab onto the wall that you are associating your cursor with. Okay, so for today's examples, I'm going to use the floor-based model. Let's see, let's get back to where that was. Okay, so this looks like it. Family 1 floor plan. Okay, so this is going to be our floor-based family. All right, so we have let's just look at some of the similarities between what we have in our project versus our family creator. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, our actual tools that we are using are much more simplified. You can't load in things like doors. You can't load in windows or anything like that. Everything that we're going to create is all comprised of just very basic shapes and extrusions, okay? And we have 5 very basic tools, or 6 tools here, that we're going to use to create everything, okay? And they're all very basic, they're all very basic tools, okay? So we have extrusion, blend, revolve, sweep, blend, and void forms. We'll talk about maybe 3 of these today, and they're probably the ones that I use 95% of the time. And then next class we may look at some of the others, but you'll likely learn maybe a couple of them just whenever you run into the time when you need to use them. Okay, you have model lines just like you did in our project. So if you use your model line, don't forget that you will actually see those lines. Those are physical objects. Okay, versus if you go to view, you have actual annotative lines. Okay, I mean right here under symbolic lines, these are all going to be just annotations, things that you can't see in your model. Okay, components, you can actually load in other components if you wanted to. Model text, if you want actual 3-dimensional text. Reference lines and reference planes, you use those just like you would inside of a project. Okay, we'll talk about the importance of those. Those become extremely important when working with families, is understanding the different planes that you have to work with around the model. Okay, like right now I'm working off of my reference level plane. So it's only the plane that I'm working off of is just the face of this little piece of floor that they create, that they give us. But once you start to extrude the different components of this chair, you're going to have lots of other work planes that you can use. For example, let's say you want to create, this piece of wood right here that spans from this leg to this leg. Well, there's a couple ways you could create that. You could either create it on the very bottom reference plane and just extrude it up, or you could select the face of this leg and make that your reference plane and actually draw the rectangle there and let it extrude it out this way. Okay, so I'll show you some examples of that here in just a second. So we have our reference plane button, and then once we're all finished and we've created our family, we can then load it into our project just like we did the pieces of furniture that we preloaded into our residence. Okay, so let's look at the different tools that we have to work with. All right, so I'm going to start by maybe making just a very basic table. Okay, and the tools that we're going to use to make this table, we'll look at extrusion, we'll look at blend, and we're also going to look at sweep. And really understanding those 3 will actually allow you to understand the other 2 as well, because the other 2 are just combinations of the others. Okay, and then we'll also look at void forms a little bit today too. So we've already actually talked about void forms when we were creating the fireplace. Remember, we actually used it to subtract pieces from the larger mass that we had originally created. And you'll notice that if you click on void forms, you can actually do a void of all of the different tools that we have up here as well. Okay, so you have your void blend, you have your void revolve, void sweep blend. Those are all just void versions of our regular tools. Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is we're going to look at extrusion. So we've already looked at this a little bit when we were creating the fireplace. Okay, so when I click on extrusion right now, we have a couple of different objects. We have our or options to choose when working. All right, so we have our different constraints over here. We have our where our extrusion will start and where our extrusion will end. So right now, because our work plane is actually currently set to just the default reference level, so if our extrusion start is at 0, 0, where would we all think 0, 0 is?
The surface.
It's the surface. Yeah, right. It's the surface of this object that we have here on the bottom, and it will remain that even though we're in 3D. It will remain that until we change it. Okay. If you go to a ceiling plan, it will change the reference plane to the associated with the ceiling plan. Okay, but right now we actually don't have anything. All right. So, and then if you have elevations, it will change the reference planes to, so if, for example, if I click on the elevation associated with this side of this face, it will change the reference plane to that side. Okay, so on and so forth. And unless you were to change it up here. All right, so you also have the object to add a material. All right, and so right now all of these different materials that you would add are not instance or type-based parameters. If you actually wanted to change the material, you'd have to physically actually go into the family and change the material there and save a new instance of that family every time you change the material. So that's why the importance of creating parametric families becomes so important. So for those of you that came in a little bit late, we'll be looking at parametric families next class. Today we're just going to be looking at very basic families. So the first tool that we're going to learn is the extrusion tool. All right. Feel free to use model lines in your different annotative lines as reference lines when you're actually working. I am going to work off of a top view and start to create the legs of my table. So I'm going to go ahead and pretend that the legs of my table are very basic. They're just round, very round legs, okay? And that's going to be what we look at for our extrusion. So I'm going to use the circle tool, and maybe I actually draw a couple lines so that I can have an understanding of where the center of this actually is. Okay, and I am going to draw a couple circles that are going to be representative of the legs of my table. We'll say those legs are 4 inches in diameter. That's fine. 2 inches, 2-inch radius. And I'll go ahead and create that. And I'm going to go ahead and place this one at the midpoint of this line. Okay, so I'm going to grab it from the center and I'm going to place it at the midpoint. So my cursor should snap to it. There we go. All right, now I can extend this and I should be able to work that around. So if I want this circle to be in the exact same place on all of these lines here, what tool might I use to do that?
Mirror.
Yeah, exactly, mirror. So I can go ahead and click on that circle. I'm going to use my mirror draw axis tool and I'll go ahead and draw an axis to mirror these objects in the exact same place in all the different quadrants of where we're working. Okay, so actually one thing I should probably pay attention to is how far is this? Roughly. Okay, about 5 feet. Okay, so that's fine. Just want to make sure I wasn't drawing a table that was like 30 feet in diameter. That wouldn't work out. So I'm going to click on both of these table legs that I've created, and I'm also going to mirror it over to the other side. Okay, there we go. So now that I got that, I can go ahead and delete these 2 reference lines that I just created. All right, and when I hit the check mark, you'll notice that now I have 4 actual three-dimensional objects. And if I click on them, it says the start constraint for the extrusion is 0, 0, and the end constraint is 1 foot. All right, and I can adjust the height of these objects in 2 different ways. Okay, I can either drag them up with like so by clicking on the actual arrow toggle in the middle. Okay, and notice that end constraint is now just adjusting accordingly. Or if I want to be very specific, say I want the top of my table to be, what do we think this is? Maybe 2.5 feet here, 2 feet? We'll say 2.5 feet. So we'll say 2'6", and then that will now automatically adjust accordingly. Okay, we all see that? So that's going to be our basic extrusion. Okay. Now, if I want to pick or if I want to create a tabletop, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to go to Create, Extrusion. I also want this to be round. I'm going to draw, again, a couple reference lines just to know where the start of my round tabletop is going to be. I'm going to click on that circle tool, start from the middle, and I'll say that maybe this is an 8-foot, big old 8-foot round table. Yeah, this is a really big table. All right, and then now I would get rid of the 2 center lines. Okay, because you can't have lines that intersect like that, you have to actually have a defined shape that represents the extrusion. Okay, so typically you would probably actually use something like a detail line before you actually start creating the shape, but you can also use these lines if you want to, as long as you just delete them before you hit the check mark. Okay, so before I hit the check mark though, I need to know where this extrusion is going to lie. So if I know where the top of my legs are, what do you think our constraints might be for this tabletop?
Start at 2.6.
Yeah, you'd start at 2.6. Okay, and then depending on the thickness of that tabletop, maybe it's 2 inches. So 2'8" would be the end of my extrusion. Okay, so there's the end of my extrusion. I go ahead and hit the check mark. All right, and if I turn this over, we can see here that we now have a tabletop on top of our legs. Okay, so let's look at, before we move on to the next tool, let's look at how we might change our reference plane for this particular table. So let's say I want to change my reference plane to the top of this tabletop. How would we do that? We've talked about it briefly in the past when we were actually working on the fireplace. Anybody remember? I want to change the reference plane. Maybe I want to build a plate. I want to build a plate that I want to put on top of this table. And I want to start building it on the top of the tabletop versus the ground. Okay, you could actually use the ground as your you could start building this plate if you wanted to using the ground reference plane, but what makes it difficult, as you keep going up, you have to you're now thinking as the bottom of your reference plane at 2'8". Okay, so you're starting to add all of the little increments on top of 2'8" versus starting at 0, 0. So if I want to start at 0, 0 and actually want to start drawing at the top of this table, what was that?
Click on the face for the surface of the table.
Say that again.
To draw the whatever you want. Click on the face.
Okay, and how would we do that? You're correct, but I'm talking about more specifically the actual tool. So if I go to create, what would I need to do to be able to select that face? Right, we're going to go over to set. Yep, exactly. Set workplane. All right, and under name, you'll notice that it gives you just a couple. None of those are what we want. What I actually end up using a lot is pick a plane. And what that allows us to do is to pick any surface in the model to work off of. If I can either, I could choose the bottom of the leg, I can choose the top of the leg, I could choose the bottom of our tabletop, I could choose the top of our tabletop. So right now, our surface is now the top of this tabletop. So if I went to extrusion and I started to draw, a couple of different objects, you'll see that that is now on top of that tabletop. So when you are creating your chair, think about what your work planes are as you start to get deeper and deeper into the actual details of that chair. So that you could probably create a majority of the objects for this chair on the bottom reference plane, but I promise you a lot of it will be a lot easier if you start to use the shapes that you've already created as new work planes. So you might use the face of this leg as the work plane to draw that extrusion. Or you might use the face of, or the inside face of this piece to create that extrusion. You start to see where I'm getting on this. Is start to look at every face inside that family as a potential new work plane. Okay, and you can start to use that so you can actually work in 3D too. A lot of times it's hard to actually see where you're drawing because you haven't created a view for every one of those different places. Okay, so just keep in mind that you have really, eventually when you're creating a really complex family, you might have 5, 10, 20, 50, or maybe even 100 different work planes that you can use to your advantage. All right, so let's look at a couple of the other different shapes. Yes, I do. All right, so I'm going to delete this tabletop here. Let's delete these legs. And let's create the same thing, but let's use a different tool. So I'm going to go back over to Create. And what we're going to do, instead of for extrusion for the legs, I'm going to use blend. Okay, what blend does is it allows you to create a solid object like an extrusion, but using two different shapes. Okay, and so what you do is you would draw your first shape, whatever object, whatever shape that might be, whether it be a square or a circle or a hexagon or an octagon or something like that. And then you would draw the second shape and you would define a bottom and a top constraint. So your bottom constraint would be associated with shape 1 and the top constraint would be associated with shape 2. And what it will do is it will create a blend of those two shapes. So where that might come into handy is, let's say you're making a table, all right, and that table has maybe a really thin and skinny bottom of the leg, but the top of it is nice and beefy or something like that. There's some nice mass to the top of that leg. That's where a blend might really come in handy. And I'm sure you can probably think of lots of other examples as well. So earlier when I was saying, think about families as their basic shapes and components. For example, I'm trying to find an object in this class that would be a perfect example of a blend. Let's see, maybe like this. Like this coffee cup right here, whereas the bottom of it is a circle and the top of the coffee cup is just a larger circle. So if I was to create a blend, I would create the two circles, each of different size, and I would be able to create that kind of staggered shape. Okay, so I'm going to click on blend, all right, and the first thing that we're going to do is start drawing the bottom. Okay, and by default, it will automatically allow you to start creating the bottom shape. Okay, so you don't need to click on any button. I'm just going to go ahead and start creating the bottom, and that's going to be associated with first end. Okay, instead of bottom constraint and top constraint, it's going to be first and second end. All right, so I'm going to create this time let's create a rectangle or a square. Okay, so we'll say the bottom of this is, I'm going to say something like that. Okay, 2 inches by 2 inches. All right, we can all see, my work plane is actually a little too high. Let's change that back because we're actually still working off of what we were doing earlier. So let's just change that back to reference level. All right, and again, I'm going to create the bottom of my first leg. I'm going to say that's 2 inches by 2 inches. All right, and that's going to represent the first end of that blend. All right, now my second end, I'm going to say is at 2'6". All right, so 2'6". And I'm going to click on Edit Top. Okay, I'm going to now click on Edit Top, and I'm going to draw it directly over my first shape that I created. Now it's not going to change the reference plane, so it's not going to be drawing it 2'6" above the original one. Actually, I don't think it will. We'll look at that in a second. But I'm going to, again, I'm going to click on the rectangle tool, and I'm going to say, I'm just kind of eyeballing this right here for now, but you'll actually probably want to maybe create some reference lines. So you might do something like, actually, let's use our pick lines tool. Let's do it the correct way. Let's click on the pick lines tool and let's offset it 3 inches. That's actually probably a little big. Let's go 2 inches. All right, so I'm going to offset it, and I'll actually go like this. Let's offset the original one. So now at least I know that these lines are all a perfect distance from our original object. All right. So if I look at this in 3D, notice it's just right on top of the other one, but we've defined a base and we've also defined a top. If I want to go back and edit the base, I can click on Edit Base, and I can go back and forth between the two different shapes that we've created. I'm now going to go ahead and hit check, and notice that we now have a blend of those two different shapes. Okay, and then from there, I could copy that shape over to the different sides of our desk or table or whatever we're building. All right, so maybe we just do this. Okay, we'll say that those are the 4 legs of our table. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and build a tabletop again before we move on to our next tool. Let's build an extrusion, and we'll also we'll also, actually, no, I'm going to do it just kind of a basic one. I'm going to make sure that this tabletop is just overhanging.
Create a new plane, Workplane, just with the tabletop on.
Yep. So I could use the reference plane. I could just say that it's 2'6" to 2'8" like we just talked about. But yes, we could change the work plane. So we could go over to create and we can go to set, pick a plane, and I could pick the top of those legs. Sure, that's definitely something that we could do. Okay, and then so I'm going to go to extrusion now. And I'm not going to make this 2'6" to 2'8". I'm now going to change this back to what? What's our work plane now? If we selected the top of the legs, it would be 0 because we've now set the work plane to the top. So we're kind of basically resetting that. All right, so we're going to say this is now just 2 inches thick. And I'm going to offset this tabletop, we'll say 4 inches or 3 inches from the edge of my legs. Okay, what tool might I use to actually complete this shape? Yeah, trim.
Trim tool.
Trim tool. So I'm going to click on my trim tool. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, and that's going to be our tabletop. All right, go ahead and hit the check mark. And look at that. Okay, we're getting some nice, newer, a little bit more intricate details. It's starting to look a little bit better, but still very basic. Let's look at another tool though. And the next tool we're going to look at is going to be the sweep tool. Okay, what a sweep tool does, and actually if I let my mouse just sit over this over the actual tool, the actual little video that it gives you is a nice little example of how that tool actually works. Okay, so what this tool is really good for is defining an actual edge of whatever it is that you want to create. So you're going to define an edge or a location, and then you're going to create a profile. Okay, and that profile will just wrap itself around the entire boundary that you've created. Okay. Huh?
It needs a path.
A path, exactly. You just need to assign a path for that edge. So let's say that for this table, we don't want this really nice and orthogonal 90-degree edge. Maybe we want to actually give it some, like a nice little profile that wraps around the edge of this desk or this table. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on sweep. All right, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set my work plane to the work plane that is most associated with the area where I want to draw my path. Okay, so I'm going to create a little profile that basically allows this to have maybe a nice rounded edge. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to set work plane, and I'm going to pick the plane as the top of my tabletop. All right, and then I'm going to go back and click on modify. And the first of 2 steps, I guess you can say 3 steps. Step 1 being to define your work plane. Step 2 is going to be to sketch the path. Well, I want that profile to actually wrap the entire edge of this table. Okay, so I am going to use my pick lines tool. I've already defined my work plane, which is the top. So I can actually go through and click on all of the edges of the tabletop. And notice that it puts a pink line right on the edge of that tabletop. So the path is going to be that. Okay, we all see that? That's going to be our path of which our profile is going to be, will wrap eventually. Okay, so as soon as we're done defining our path, I'm going to click on the check mark, and then I'm going to click on Edit Profile. All right, I'm going to click on Edit Profile, and I'm going to start drawing that profile on the little grid that has been given to us right here. Okay, so right now I'm going to draw it right here on this face. All right, so I'm going to use my different draw tools, and I'm going to draw. Let's go ahead and just align this on front. All right, so that's going to be one edge. All right, and maybe I use the arc. All right, and that's our other edge. Okay, everyone see that profile that I'm creating right there? All right, if I look at it in 3D here, you can see that rounded edge that I've now given it. Okay, and as soon as I've done all 3 of those steps, I've defined the work plane, I have drawn the path, and I've created the profile. I will then hit the check mark. Okay, I will hit the check mark one more time, and you'll see here that now you have that nice rounded edge, or whatever profile you created. You could create, you know, a super intricate profile if you wanted to. You could create something like, you know, maybe it does that or something like that. Who knows? Whatever you want to do is okay with me. But that's when you can start to create really intricate, you know, edges and start to really refine what that family wants to look like. Okay, so just another one of those options. Any questions about either of those tools? Okay.
Can you edit just the edge? Like, say you wanted it square, but you don't want a sharp square edge. You want it like rounded just along the top.
Okay. So let's click on that sweep that we just created. I'll then click on Edit Sweep. Okay. And I'm going to go back to clicking on. Let's see. I'm going to go over to Select Profile and then Edit Profile. And then yes, you can go back and you could edit that to whatever way you want. So you were saying that you just wanted, say that one more time.
Like just the corner here. Like if I wanted just like an arc right there, like just so the edge isn't completely square, like this. Like see how that's rounded at the edge?
Oh, okay. So that's a great question. So you don't actually want to add something to it. We're actually going to subtract it a little bit. Okay. So great point. So I'm going to hit the checkpoint and let's look at how we would do that. Okay, so you're saying that you just wanted to round the edge, just the top edge. So let's delete this sweep and let's actually, let's do what you're just talking about. So instead of doing that sweep, I'm going to do a void sweep. Okay, so I'm going to do a void sweep in this instance where I'm going to go to click on void forms and I'm going to click on void sweep. And to do that, so remember the difference between sweep and void sweep is this is actually just going to subtract the shape that you draw. The tool works exactly the same, but it's going to subtract it. So essentially, when you're drawing your profile, you want that profile to actually be intersecting the original object that you want it to subtract from. Okay, so I'm going to do the exact same thing here. I'm going to go to Set Workplane, Pick Plane. I think I was probably already correct the first time. But I'll click the top. All right, that looks good. I'm going to then sketch the path. It's going to be the same path of what we were doing earlier. Okay, same path, check mark. All right, edit profile. But this time we're just going to approach it just a little bit differently. Okay, instead of drawing the profile on the outer face, we're actually going to draw it so that it intersects the original object. Okay, so what I'll do is let's get an arc. Maybe it starts here in the middle, goes at a 45-degree edge, it snaps. Perfect, there we go. And I'm just going to draw this out just a little bit, like so. All right, so I've now given it that profile, and what it's going to do, it's going to subtract all of that object. Okay, how far you bring this out here doesn't matter. You could have made that 20 feet out, 20 feet all the way around. All that matters is the two objects that are intersecting. Okay, and then when I hit check mark again, you'll see that now we have a rounded edge. Okay?
You have fillet tool in Revit.
Oh, do we have oh no, there's not. Well, fillet is very much just like the trim tool. But no, it's not gonna you can't assign a radius.
Yeah,
no, you can't. No, yeah, you can't. It's not exactly like fillet, because most people actually just use fillet just to get the 90-degree corner, but most people don't know that it's actually really designed to give you a perfect radius around an edge. But no, it does not have that object or that tool. Okay, let's take this just a step further. Okay, before I set you guys loose, let's just say that we want to add glass. Okay, let's say we want to add some glass to the center of of this table. How do you think we might do that?
Create a rectangle first.
I want this. Maybe I want the center of my table to be glass.
Use the void tool again?
Yeah, we're going to use the void tool again, but we're going to do a void extrusion this time. All right, so I'm going to go to Create, Void Forms, Void Extrusion, Void Extrusion, and again I'm going to define my work plane. Let's just make sure that it's on the top of our table. I don't know if it's going to let me select it now because there's not really a defined edge.
But we can try.
You know what? I think it's already there. Let's just see. We're going to go over to show workplane. Yeah, we're actually already at the top of it, so that's good. So let's go over to void forms, void extrusion. All right, maybe I want the center of this glass to be, we'll say, 6 inches from the edge of my, let's make it a little bit more because technically we probably want maybe a nice firm edge for our plate. We'll say 1 foot. Okay, so that's going to be where the glass will be. Make sure that it's not intersecting any of our table legs. That looks good. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark. All right, so right now it says our start is at 0, 0, and the end is at 2 inches. So technically that void form is going to go up. So we actually want this to go down. So we're going to make the end of this maybe minus, we'll say -3, because we want it to actually go all the way through the table. Yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Let's see. Let's change that to, yeah, let's try this. -3 inches to 1 inch. There we go. Oh, it's still not. Let's pull it through. Okay, so there's our opening. Okay. Now, if you really wanted to get really detailed, you could do 2 void forms. You could do one that goes all the way through, maybe one that goes not quite all the way through, so you actually give like a lip that you would actually, maybe the glass would actually sit on. Okay, so that's an option. All right, so let's look at this. I'm not going to get that detailed for this example yet, but let's turn off our work plane. Let's look at this in realistic. Right now it's all gray, so there's no materials associated with this. So if you wanted to, you could start to go through and select your different extrusions, and you could start to assign materials to it. All right, so maybe we create a new material. We'll call this cherry wood, something like that. You know what I don't have here? I'm not going to be able to. You bugger! I don't have another material that I can pull from. Let's see. Let's see if I can remember it. Local C, program 86. God, I can never remember the exact path. Anyways, I'm not going to assign materials to it. I think everyone here knows how to assign materials. But what I will do is I'm going to draw my glass. So I'm going to go to Create, Extrusion this time, and I'm just going to outline top of this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark. All right, right now that's a little too thick. I'm going to say that this is going to be like -0.25 inches. All right, so now we have just a very, very thin piece of glass, but this time I can change this to glass because that is actually already a material that's already been chosen. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. All right, that should be enough for creating the piece of furniture that we're going to do for our critical thinking exercise. And then next class, we're going to look at how to make some of these different components parametric. Okay, so that when you load it into your project, you could adjust the size of the tabletop. You can adjust the size or the height of the legs or their placement. Okay, and we'll look at some of the more complicated details. But today we covered extrusion, blend, and sweep. We've also talked about a few of the different void forms. Now you could also do sweep blend and you could do revolve. They work exactly like the other tools that we learned. They're just combinations of each other. All right, so go ahead and get started. Go to critical thinking exercise number 9. We'll work on this for about an hour and a half today. Okay, if you finish this fairly early, create something a little bit more complicated, and to turn it in, you'll just need to create a small sheet or you actually don't even really need to create a sheet. Just do a 3D view of the chair and just export that and upload it to Canvas. Okay, no need to put it on a sheet and spend time doing that. All right, so go ahead and get started. I'll come by and check on everybody. If you want to do a different piece of furniture, feel free to go on Google and type in, furniture and find something that looks interesting and try to replicate it as close as you can.
How do you make it lean like that? Based on picture?
Well, what you'd probably need to do is you'd need to create a new reference plane. Okay, so start with that. I want you to think of it as a design challenge, okay, and how you might do this. I think you'll think of it once you get to that point. Okay, but the main thing is to think about the different reference planes that you can work with. All right, I'll give you a hint in that you can't do it based off of the regular reference plane, the ground plane. Okay, so you'll have to use a different reference plane to create that sloped shape.